Okay. Now we can get started. Okay. Like I said, I'm Bill Bright. I am the tax program coordinator for the VITA program through the United Way of Greater Mercer. That's my email address, which you should all have already. The top number is my number at United Way. The bottom number is my my personal number. Both will ring on my cell phone. Feel free to use either one. I try not to share them with our tax clients for obvious reasons, because I just don't need to be bothered. Nor does anybody about, status of refunds, et cetera, et cetera. In brief, the VITA program provides a free federal and state tax return for household income that is less than $65,000. Now, that's can be a bit of a soft number. For instance, we have quite a few state of New Jersey retirees in the Hamilton area. If they're filing jointly, you could literally be looking at 4 pieces of paper, two 1099s from the state and 2 Social Security statements. And so it's not a whole lot of extra work. And for us, it's a fair amount of our clientele are in that category. Sometimes income could get up to like maybe 80 or 90,000, which is not really exactly living high on the hog in this part of the world. Okay. That's kind of a reality that we live in. We do make some accommodations for others, but we generally don't have an issue coming anywhere near that number. And I'll show that in a little bit. The program is organized and supported completely by the IRS and the state of New Jersey. We got our IRS grant this year, and we got a nice supplementary grant last November from the state for $15,000, which allowed us to buy 22 laptops and a couple of printers. So we are definitely, from a technology standpoint, pretty well caught up. At the local spot, at the individual site organization, those are sponsored by various organizations. We'll get into that in the next slide. And each one of those is run by a site coordinator. We file everything electronically using a program called TaxWise. TaxWise is a product of Wolters Kluwer. It is a commercial product. It's been kind of geared down for the nonprofit sector, and we try and I would call it dummy it down, but the way we set up our templates, we make it very, very straightforward as far as how to use the product. The IRS software on their contract is TaxSlayer, which is very similar to TurboTax. And when the contract came up 3 or 4 years ago, we decided to stick with TaxWise because we just feel it meets our needs, and didn't really feel the need to get everybody back up to speed on a new software. So the program, the various sites that we're at in the Trenton Hamilton area are the Salvation Army, Boys and Girls Club. We used to be at Arm in Arm, which used to be called Crisis Ministry, which is in downtown Trenton, the Hamilton Public Library, and as well as the United Way office on Route 1. We generally start the first Monday in February and run through the April 15th. This year, I believe the 15th is a Saturday. So I'm sure that'll be a very busy Saturday for us. Each site is open for roughly 4 hours per session. And that's what we are looking for folks to commit. Some sessions, for instance, I generally will be at the Salvation Army Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays from 12 to 4. And so I'll have a bit of a different crew probably each time. The Boys and Girls Club will probably just be the Saturday program at the Spruce Street location, which is very near the Trenton Farmers Market. The Hamilton Public Library, we are going back to this year. We had been at Mercer Connection, but those of you who are in the Hamilton area probably know where that is on Route 33. They took us in last year during COVID. And we'll probably have a couple more pop-up spots, and I'll get to that as we get further along here. The various roles that we have for folks to get involved there's basically 4. One is the greeter / intake screener. And this is very important. This person does not need to be certified at the basic level. So it would be great for someone who's a people person, but maybe is a little phobic about actually doing tax returns. But it is very, very important because they set the tone. It's the person's first point of contact. That person will greet them, ask them a couple of routine questions to make sure that they're here to do the current year's tax return, as well as do they have their photo ID and social security card, as well as social security cards for everyone who they may be claiming. In this case, there can be some discretion. Frequently, we'll have some seniors who come in who do not have their cards, but we've been dealing with them for years. And again, it's just a look and feel. If someone has a social security statement, then that's generally good enough for us. Again, it just makes common sense. An 85-year-old woman who took 2 buses to get down to downtown Trenton or out to the United Way, we're not going to turn her away because she doesn't have her social security card. Then there's the tax preparer, and that is someone who's either has the basic or the advanced certification, and they will actually do the work of putting all the information in the tax program. The reviewer will be, like it says, be reviewing their work. Every return gets a review, and they will, upon the completion of the review, they will print off the return, give it to the taxpayer. They will need to sign the Form 8879, which is the e-file authorization, and we keep a copy of that for our records to make sure we know that we had, that indicates to us that the return had been reviewed with the client, that they basically agreed that all of the information that they have was, to their knowledge, best of their knowledge, correct, and that they understand the amount of the refund, or unfortunately the amount that they may owe. The site coordinator is someone who basically is managing the entire facility for the day, dealing with problems as they come up, roaming around. If we have 4 tax preparers, somebody's always going to have a question that he or she can go over and assist with. Sometimes the site coordinator is the reviewer. That's usually someone who's got a few years in the program and has a kind of a working knowledge pretty much of all the things that we see. The way the whole process works is, starting, during the winter months, we'll be doing some client outreach, direct mail, social media, some local advertising on NJ Transit buses, in the Trentonian and the Trenton Times. United Way has some events during the tax season where they'll have information tables about where people can go to get their taxes done. They'll have tables set up at places like Task or Catholic Charities. Catholic Charities used to be one of our sites. They're no longer with us. And other social service agencies that people might come in contact with. And we hope that they have their intake forms completed prior to arriving, that they have all their ID. When they come in, they wait in the designated area and they organize their documents. That's after they've signed in. And by that I mean, like, they're going to basically, we have quite a few people that come in, they haven't even opened up their social security statement or their W-2s. Get all that open. Make sure they have, we're doing the 2022 tax year to make sure that they have all the 2022 documents. It happens every year where, somebody brought last year's stuff and we get halfway through the return and we're realizing we did something that had already been done. So it's important to try and, that's where the reviewer or intake person will kind of help make sure we don't have those problems. Again, when they meet with the tax preparer, they're going to assist with making sure that everything has been completed, the intake sheet, the supplemental sheet. Make sure that they indicated, are they paying rent? Do they have any extra medical expenses? If they indicated that they have direct deposit, do they have their bank information with them? And if they've been at a previous VITA site, that can help out a lot. I mean, if they come to Salvation Army and they were there last year, when we type in their social, it's going to pull last year's information. Now it will scrub everything. In other words, it'll have all their W-2s, but it'll have all the information's gone. But it'll have their address, it'll have all the dependents if there's anything. And so that speeds up the process pretty dramatically. Once all that gets organized, they start the input process. Once that's done, usually the taxpayer will say, Mr. Smith, based on what I see right now, it looks like you're getting $1,000 refund. Excuse me. Does that sound in line with what you've done in the past? And if he says yes, it's like, okay, we're pretty much talking apples and apples here, and that will then go to the reviewer, and then he will review it once again, print the copy out, go line by line as needed to explain, why again, if there is a big change, it may be very obvious. Maybe his income went up a lot this year, and so he's not getting as much earned income credit. Or one of their children has aged out of the child tax credit. Things like that can make a big swing in how big the refund may be. After that's all done, they will sign the e-file authorization. We'll return the documents to the taxpayer. All we keep is that e-file authorization. That's it. We then will have it e-filed within 24 hours. Usually we'll know within several hours after that whether the federal return has been successfully been transmitted. It takes a couple of days for the New Jersey one to go through. If there are any rejects, those are dealt with expeditiously. Sometimes we can handle them on ourselves. Excuse me. Others may require a follow-up phone call to the taxpayer. In some instances, they may need to come back to the site to help clear up whatever issue there was. That doesn't happen a lot, but again, it generally does. There's too many data points that we're going to get right every time. So once we get into the actual formal training process, which will start in early December, we're going to go over a couple modules that basically cover principles of U.S. individual income tax law. And that is, in a nutshell, things like, who has to file, why you should file, the nature of filing, what your filing status is, the dependents, what makes it dependent, can I claim this person, can I claim that person, sources of income, things we have to be careful of. And then on the expense side too, as far as itemization. The good news is, since the tax overhaul in 2016, almost no one itemizes anymore. And that makes our life a little bit easier. We frequently have folks that come in with a shopping bag full of receipts from the pharmacy, or those door hangers that they get when they drop off their household goods at the red, white, and blue. And all of that is really meaningless for 99% of our clients. We'll be spending a fair amount of time using the TaxWise online software. Everyone will get a log on to the practice environment, and that will happen in December. And then once the software becomes live in middle of January, we'll be getting people signed in to the various sites that we will be using, and we'll get into that as well later. I'll also review briefly the tax aspects of the Affordable Care Act. This is something that we're still dealing with on a regular basis. Not that many people get Obamacare anymore, but there are new things that have to be done in order to make sure that that's done correctly. The state of New Jersey is still has the financial penalty if you do not have health care. So it's incumbent on everybody to get health care. That's the whole point of the penalty, is try and push people to go to the exchange to get the health care off the exchange. We'll also review New Jersey and Pennsylvania tax returns. No state tax information or state tax law is involved in the IRS exam. So we wait until the beginning of the year when the software is live, because there are no state returns in the practice lab. So we wait till the new one comes in. Usually for New Jersey and Pennsylvania, there's only a few items that need to be put into the tax form. It's usually things like the amount of rent, their school district code, and then we had to re-enter the bank account information. It's very straightforward. Pennsylvania is even more streamlined. It does get complicated when people live in one state and work in the other and don't have the tax taken out by the appropriate taxing authority. That gets a little messy, and that's one thing where TaxWise handles it much better than TaxSlayer. So I'd like to show you a little bit, some statistics from the past year, which show, what we do and, where we want to go with this. Last year, we did 1,229 returns. That's down from a peak in like 2017 of about 2,200 returns. During COVID, we only did 400 or 500. Last year, the 2020 tax year, we did 900. So we had a nice about 30% jump this year. But obviously, it begs to ask the question, where did the 1,000 people go to get their tax returns? And at $300 a pop, somebody's making some money out there if they're going to H&R or Jackson Hewitt or any of these other mom and pop tax prep sites in the Trenton area. The sites that we were at last year, again, this is not what we usually do, but this was all we could accommodate last year due to COVID and the number of volunteers that we had. So the middle one there, Salvation Army Boys and Girls Club, Spruce Street, was our biggest spot. The Salvation Army is it's called the Citadel Building. It's in downtown Trenton, very near the Trenton train station. They welcomed us in 2 years ago. They have a large multi-purpose room. It's perfect for what we do. And I'm kind of leaning that this will be our permanent sort of home, if you will, in central Trenton. It's very easy to get to, a lot of parking, very safe. The people there are great. The staff is, wants us to come. They have several that speak Spanish. So if for some reason our Spanish speakers aren't there, our translators aren't there that day, they've been more than willing to help. And that's a big, that's a big thing in our favor. The Spruce Street location in Boys and Girls Club is right near the Trenton Farmers Market. And we only did that on Saturdays, but it was a very popular site. We had a bunch of Princeton grad students help us there. And we were able to do about 30 returns every Saturday. The United Way building, again, we can get as many nights a week there as we want or days, depending on the volunteers, because it's basically, we have a whole floor and there's a lot of empty offices and cubes, and we can have as much as we want. The problem is it's on Route 1, so you need transportation to get there. So we try not to, go one direction too hard. I'd like to have a bigger presence in Trenton where I think the need is the greatest, but we will do what we can as we can. Mercer Connection, again, that had 230 returns. That last year was a drop off and pickup site due to COVID. So people would come in, we would look at their documents, we would scan them, we would upload them to a Dropbox account, and the returns would be prepared remotely. Then they'd be reviewed remotely, then they'd be printed, they'd be assembled, and people would come back a week later to pick them up. That sounds great, but the reality is that it's over twice as much work, and it's a very stressful process because we're constantly going back and forth to people. Our bread and butter is people coming in without an appointment. We sit down with them, we get them in, we get them out in as expeditious a manner as possible. We also had a pop-up last year, what I call a pop-up site at the Children's Home Society, which is in the Roebling Center in Trenton. We're going to have a couple more of those. We're going to do probably Children's Home again, as well as New Jersey Rise, which is in Hightstown. There's a fairly large Spanish-speaking population in that part of Mercer County. And Hightstown's in that kind of a weird spot where it's practically in Middlesex County and also in Monmouth County. So we're trying to have a bigger footprint there. We used to many years ago. And again, the number of volunteers has dictated that didn't happen, but hopefully this year we can go back there. So here's a breakdown of like some of the numbers for what we filed last year. The vast majority of them are single people. Okay. And I don't know why that is, why we're not seeing more heads of household. married filing joint. Luckily, only a few were married filing separate because that's usually not a good situation. And we'll talk about that in formal training. Our average age is 56. 60% of our folks use direct deposit. And the average adjusted gross is 29,333. So you can see that's well under our 65,000 household limit. We are one of the, as far as AGI goes, within New Jersey, ours is one of the lower ones. But the good news is it has been trending up. I believe 2 years ago, it was about 25,000. So we are seeing some folks do better in the aggregate. Now, interesting that, COVID was kind of, a lot of the COVID relief had expired in 2021, early 2021, but there's still a fair amount of people that were collecting unemployment. Out of all those returns, 135 collected an average of $16,000 in unemployment for $2.2 million. Our refunds were 1.6 million. Across all 1,200 returns, that's about $1,330. For those that actually got a refund, that's $2,000. And interestingly enough, 215 people owed a balance average of $1,300. I suspect that was due to the continued amount of unemployment that folks were receiving that was not being taxed. Federal withholding tax needs to come out of unemployment. However, a lot of the unemployment was funded through COVID relief, and they didn't take the 10% tax out. So some people got that surprise. All right, the earned income credit, again, it's a big number, 435,000 for an average of 1,300. So almost a quarter of our folks got that. And the refundable child tax credit, roughly 212 taxpayers qualified for roughly $2,300 each. Now, the big surprise this year is going to be in the earned income credit and the refundable child tax credit. The earned income credit the expanded earned income credit was allowed to expire, so people 65 and older will not be able to get that. As the advanced child tax credit, that did not get renewed, and on top of that, it's going to be income based again, just like it was in 2019 and prior. There were instances where folks who had no income were getting the full amount of the child tax credit. So that's gone away. And so in a nutshell, what that means is refunds are probably on the average going to be lower this coming year. So I'm sure we're going to have to be prepared to do that with folks. So I'd like to show. Okay, I'd like to go over briefly what a typical return might look like. Okay. And let's see here. Yeah. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, so am I sharing this? Does everybody see Patsy Cline? Mm-hmm. Okay. So here's Patsy Cline. Before she became a world famous country singer, she lived in Trenton and was a certified nursing assistant. She filled out this is the page 1 of the standard intake form. She indicated that she's not disabled. She's not a full-time student. No one can claim her. And she's never married, which is IRS speak for being single. All of this information here on number 2 in part 2 is about anyone she's claiming for dependents, and she's not. So we go to the second page, and this is the one that can take people quite a while. The vast majority of our folks will only have part 3, number 1. Wages are from in the form of a W-2. And there may be multiple W-2s. But the rest of it, interest and dividends, again, state and local refunds are only really relevant if they itemize, and nobody itemizes. I think we had 6 that itemized last year, and some of those were friends of VITA volunteers. Unfortunately, no one's getting alimony, and we'll go through all these other types of incomes and how to handle all that when we get into formal training. But as you can see, there's quite a few that go through all this. And then the expenses, if these folks have any kind of retirement account contributions, generally it's a payroll deduction. It's not a check written to a Vanguard IRA, if you will, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes we get these folks with school supplies if they're a teacher or teacher's aide. Student loan interest, we see a fair amount of those. And then these life events, we don't see much of that at all. The last question is really all we've seen for the last 2 years. Did they receive the economic impact payment? So in other words, stimulus for each year. In this case, she indicated that she did. So right now, as the tax preparer, all I'm looking for Patsy Cline is one W-2. So she checks off some other things here. She wants direct deposit. She signs the last page, and then she gives me the tax preparer her W-2. Just a heads up, when we start doing training, you can ignore. I kind of reuse some of these scenarios. So this is a 2019 W-2, but for our purposes, it's just relevant. So you can see she made $17,073 in box one wages. There's $14.15 withheld. Obviously, there is some money that was put aside in looks like a 403B of some sort. And so that's why her wages are lower, her federal wages are lower than Social Security or Medicare. And at the bottom, you see her state wages and the state income tax. That's it. That right there is the majority of what we see, particularly at our Trenton sites. These are folks with, again, pretty straightforward financial picture. But again, frequently we'll see multiple W-2s. So what you get there then is extra data points. So out of all of this, once you type in Patsy's Social Security number, you've got her name, her phone number, her address, her current job, her birth date, and a couple other little items. And if she had bank account information, you have to check the bank account. The EIN has to be correct for the off the W-2 for Virtue Health, and make sure that comes through correctly. And that's about it. You'll fill in a couple spots on the New Jersey return asking for rent, the school district code, and a couple other odds and ends. And in reality, once you get up to speed on the software and some little quirks about it, this shouldn't take more than 30 or 45 minutes from when she sits down until she's out the door. So again, this is the bulk of our stuff. We do have some folks that come in, they haven't filed in years. We got to do 3 or 4 years worth of returns. Some of our sites, particularly in Hamilton, that's where you'll see people with who might have Schedule Ds. They have brokerage statements, so they have capital gains or losses. We don't do rental income. We don't see a lot of complicated retirement account withdrawals. Usually it's fairly straightforward, and because of where we live, we see a lot of retirees from the state of New Jersey. So that's pretty straightforward too, as to what their gross amount is, their taxable amount, and whether or not they had enough tax withheld. That's kind of, in a nutshell, we're one for one return. I'd like to show you one other thing here. And we'll just kind of open up for a few questions if anybody has anything. I'll send this out on an email, but this link here, VITAresources.net, there's a lot of material here which you can use to help just kind of go through. Some of this hasn't been updated yet because we're just starting to get the new material, so it hasn't quite caught up yet. But if you scroll to the bottom, right here it says Lancaster, PA training videos. I spoke to these folks 3 years ago, and someone brought to my attention this. This is a program run out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. They have 150 volunteers. They did over 3,400, I think, returns last year. And they have quite a professional staff that puts this stuff together. So if you click on the first one, now these are last year's videos. Presumably these are going to be updated in the coming weeks. But if you click on that first one.
On every vacation.
And you'll see here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. The first one, filing status and dependency. A lot of these are just basic tax law. Now they will be showing things like filing limitations, standard deductions, things like that. Those have all been adjusted. But just from the law standpoint, nothing's really changed. Income will go into what types of income and what types of income have to be reported, what doesn't have to be reported. And then credits and deductions is a good one to spend some time on. I would, at your leisure, if you want to take a look at these, you can see some of them are a bit long. You can kind of speed up through some of them if you want. I will be using the PowerPoints off of this presentation once the new ones are updated when we start in December. So that's a very good sort of tutorial if you want, so that once we get started in December, a lot of this stuff is going to be a bit fresh for you. The other thing that's on this page right here, helpful IRS links, you're going to want to bookmark all three of these. This is the 4012. Now we have these on order from the IRS, so everybody can get a hard copy. But as you can see, it's 344 pages long, but a lot of that is the instructions for how to do things in TaxSlayer. So if you ignore that, it's really not that thick of information, so to speak. It's very well indexed, and we'll go through how to use this, but it's always good to every year I have to refer to this all the time. It's just like, dependents, what are the rules? Overview for the rules for claiming a dependent, whether it's a child, whether it's a relative. And all of this is pretty much the same tax law as last year, but some of the numbers have changed. The other one is there's the training guide, okay, the 4491. This one's very detailed. I don't find it to be that particularly helpful, but the one thing that is very relevant is if you go here to important changes for 2022, this tells you what's coming in for the next tax year and what expired in the previous year. For instance, this is the big one here. Yeah, the earned income tax credit expired. Higher income limits and credit for taxpayers with no children. Instead of using the 2019 income, the upper limit is now 19, not 18. And it goes on and on. There's a couple pages of this. Not all of it's relevant for VITA, but there is some really interesting stuff in here that you're going to want to take take a look at. And then the last one, and this is the most important, is the actual test book. So this is actually, it's not live on the IRS site yet, so you can't take the test if you wanted to, but you can certainly prepare it on paper. The way that it works for the IRS is the basic certification is in 3 parts. The first part is a 10-point quiz on volunteer standards of conduct. And these are just basic common sense questions like, can a volunteer be removed and barred from the program for violating the standards of conduct? Well, of course they can. Otherwise, why would we have any? And then my favorite, because it's in every year, is taxpayer offers a $20 bill because they're so happy about the quality of service. Is it appropriate to take it? Well, of course it's not. So it's 10 questions like that. The other thing is after that, you'll do what's called the interview and quality review test questions. It just asks basically why is the intake form so important? And we'll review all this, but again, this is really, really basic stuff. And then there's the actual test. And you have to go through each one before you can get to the next one. So you've done the volunteer standards of conduct, you've done the interview and quality review questions, and then you get to the basic course scenarios and test questions. Each question is based on, let's say here's Tom Brown. There's 5 bullet points about Tom. He's 36. He has a nephew that lives with him, who he supported, what he earned. Tom happens to be blind and cannot be claimed by another, and that everybody has a social. And then they ask you 2 questions regarding that situation. Again, this is the actual test. It's not like you study these questions and you go to take it and they change. So I encourage everybody as we get rolling into December, as we get through different topics, you can go back to this and review it, and then you can just mark it down that, scenario 1, question 1, the answer is X. And and we'll go through that. And then when you actually want to go to the website, the IRS website to take the test, you just go through and boom, 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 and you'll be done. It's very straightforward. And it's been my experience that this year's basic test is pretty, about the easiest one they've ever had. So again, my goal is to try and make sure everybody does what they have to do to get the basic test, and they get it completed by the early in January. And then we can spend several times going through some role playing and using the software for what we actually see at our VITA sites based on our experience. There are 9 of these scenarios on the basic. 1 through 6 are just like I just showed you, and then 7, 8, and 9 involve actually using the software. Okay, so you have to put in all of this stuff like you do in a real return. They'll have like the intake form all filled out. They will then have copies of some dummy W-2s, a 1099, a social security statement. This one's got actually some dividends in it. This one, their child actually happens to be going to college. So we do see some 1099, 1098 Ts on occasion, some other extraneous stuff, which may or may not be relevant. And then you get to the actual test questions, which in this case, there are 6 of them. So 3 of these scenarios are like this, and we're going to go through all of this. But again, it's nothing that I would get too bent out of shape on. It is, like I said, pretty straightforward. I'm going to stop sharing my. So that in a nutshell is kind of what I wanted to go over. And what I'm going to do now is, I think that's all I really have. I want to open up for questions in a minute, but I'm doing this as a recording. So I just want to indicate that come November, I'll be sending out another email about doing these meetings, training. Ideally, I would like to be doing as much as we can live at the United Way offices. There's a lot of room there in the conference room. I find it goes a lot smoother when we have a collegial kind of thing going, using all our laptops. We'll probably have a couple opportunities on Zoom, especially for things like a question and answer kind of thing, just a drop in, I'm having trouble with this concept. Can you help me kind of thing? We have been doing this remotely for 2 years now. I am looking forward to not necessarily doing it so much anymore remotely, but that's kind of where we are. And we'll pick that up as we get going. So let me just